right, everybody. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to today's webinar, Migrations, a Smooth Delivery to the AWS Cloud. I am Jay Martin, your host for the next hour. Certainly, if you have any questions throughout today's presentation, please add them to the Q&A section on the right side of your screen, and our team of experts will do the best to answer each of them before the end of the webinar. I am proud to introduce the brains of the operation here, Mr. Ed Ip, one of the fine solutions architects at ClearScale. Before we begin, I'll let Ed give a nice introduction to the company and a quick overview of his role at ClearScale.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Jay. And as Jay said, my name is Ed Ip. I'm a solutions architect here at ClearScale. And before we start, a quick plug about who we are and what we do. So ClearScale, we are a premier consulting partner with AWS, which puts us in the top 3% of all the partners in the AWS ecosystem. And we have recently, very proud of this, recently been awarded a 10th competency, which rounds us up to a total of 10. And in case you are not aware of the competency program, it is designed to identify and validate partners that has demonstrated AWS technical expertise and proven customer success in a given area. So all that said is really, all that meant is that we spent a lot of time honing our craft in the areas that's listed on the right-hand side of the screen. And about our team, majority of our staff are technical in nature, and we're coming close to about completing 1,000 projects with AWS. So again, we spend a lot of time with AWS. As a matter of fact, we're born in the cloud. We primarily focus on AWS and not much, and not very little of the other cloud infrastructure. So with that said, we've also recently received a badge there that we are part of the AWS 100 certified network, meaning that we have at least 100 individuals in the company that are AWS certified. So we are very technical and always happy to help.
Excellent. Perfect. Thank you, Ed. Well, today we have a three-pronged approach to the webinar where we'll start with Ed discussing the common business drivers for migration, then explore what the traditional migration process looks like, and finally review a few customer use cases exploring why they specifically chose to migrate to AWS and some of their results. So without further ado, Ed, if you would please take us through some of the common business drivers.
Yeah, absolutely. So the number one that we hear often out of the and there's certainly more out there of the business drivers. Every company is different, but these are the key drivers that we hear often. And the number one is cost reduction. This is probably the biggest one we hear when we talk to customers who want to migrate to AWS. And there is this belief that out there that because you go to a cloud, you can save money. While that's generally true, I do want you to think that the more you think of AWS like as a utility company, the more you're going to see in terms of cost reduction. So what I mean by that, so for example, if you're going to go away for a weekend, you're not going to keep all the lights on in your house as well as have the AC turned down to like 65 degrees. And I live in Southern California, so right now I want to turn that down because it's 100 degrees here. But if your house is 1,500 square feet, let's say, you're not going to want to purchase an AC unit that's meant for 3 times bigger than what your house needs. So the key here is thinking about right sizing and modernizing your infrastructure so you can truly realize those cost reductions. There's also techniques where you can turn off your developers' work stations, for example, or their sandbox on the weekend because they're not using it. Turn off those lights. So part of the migration strategy or the goal of migration is really think about those things, and so you can recognize more of those cost reductions. Number 2 is business agility. With flexible and on-demand resources, we see that businesses are seeing an 18-19% faster time to market. Traditionally, on-premise, anytime you want a new server, anytime you want new anything, you have to go through sign-offs, you have to go through purchase orders, shipping, provisioning, amongst all the other things that would require to even be able to use that resource, a server, a box, what have you. And if what came through the mail is not what you need, well, guess what? You have to go through this whole process again, potentially, and you're just waiting. It's a waiting game. With AWS, 99%, and I say 99% is actually higher than that, but 99% of what you need are on demand and always ready for you. And if you change your mind, you provision a C2 instance and it's not the right size, well, you only lost a couple of minutes, not days. You can just stop that instance, change the size, and relaunch it, or restart it rather, and you have the size that you need for the job at hand. And I say 99% early because there are some AWS services that has lead time. And anytime we're talking about migrations, especially if you have like petabytes of data, we start thinking about those services that requires lead time, such as you might have heard of like Snowball, for example, which is a physical device that AWS will send to you, and you plug it into your network, and you migrate or transfer all of your data into this device and ship it back to them, and they'll load it into an S3 bucket or a disk, whatever the target will be or the destination will be, so that you're not paying for data transfer. Because if you imagine petabytes, it will take not only days but also a lot of data transfer to get you there. Number 3, improve security. Companies that have migrated and modernized via AWS best practices see 43% fewer monthly security incidents. The key here is AWS best practices. So whenever we hear about companies being compromised, and I think we're hearing about more and more of those every single month, maybe every single week, it is not because AWS infrastructure is not secure. It's that the customers have left holes in the infrastructure for bad actors to find. So, for example, about a year ago, Dow Jones they have a watch list database that was leaked because they had an Elasticsearch cluster that was placed in a public subnet with wide open access. Same thing can happen on premise, and we see that as well. The key thing about security is really best practices, because AWS is secure. It's for lack of a better word, sometimes it's human errors that leads to those leaks. Number 4, end of life. Migration due to end of life of hardware and software. We see this a lot. For example, we have customers, and primarily Microsoft customers, that said, I got to get out of Windows 2012. I have to get to 2016 and above because 12 is end of life, and I don't want to buy any more licenses. So we see a lot of that. And interesting thing is that AWS actually runs 2 times more Windows workloads than other providers. Generally, anytime you talk Microsoft, we think of the other cloud provider that is owned by Microsoft. But in fact, AWS actually runs a lot more Windows workloads and provides a lot more options than the other providers can support. The number 5 driver is data center consolidation. A lot of organizations now are wanting to spend less time to manage the data center. So Dow Jones, I just talked about earlier, despite the own trouble last year, they still plan on moving majority of their compute to AWS. If you don't have to worry about having redundant power, cooling, servers, cables, and all the things that comes with operating a data center, and now your staff can actually focus on providing true business values instead of those blinking lights that's in the data center. And perhaps you need fewer IT staff, and you're able to use your budget elsewhere to accelerate your business. Number 6 is digital transformation. Coca-Cola closed 3 on-premise data centers and migrated all of the business systems to AWS, including the CRM and SAP. We see this a lot. Actually, I'm working with at least 1, maybe 2 customers that are doing that. They realize it's no longer cost-effective, not only managing the data center, as well as the CapEx versus OpEx of having all those physical inventories sitting in the data center. So they want to take this opportunity to spend less to operate the business, and wants to move as much to the cloud as possible. And AWS actually has a program, which we'll talk more about it in a little bit, called Migration Acceleration Program, or MAP. MAP, you might have heard of this, with significant funding incentives to help companies to do just this. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. And number 7 is rapid growth and merger and acquisition. That's what M&A stands for. 70% of the U.S. companies say technology integration will determine the success of their merger and acquisition deal. If it's if you've ever worked at a large company where their way of growing is by acquiring other companies. In the past, it takes weeks, months, sometimes years to truly integrate a company into your infrastructure. Now it's because the cloud and flexibility of the cloud, it allows you to make that transition a lot faster with a lot less churn and ultimately a lot less in spend. And number 8, new technology, and this is perhaps one of the more exciting key business drivers for technologists, is that there are emerging technologies such as AI, ML, IoT that it's nearly impossible to do on premise. So Intuit, because of that, deploys machine learning models 90% faster on AWS than they could have done on premise. So think about, for example, one of the buzzwords or one of the key technologies right now is Kubernetes. Everyone wants to do Kubernetes containers, Kubernetes. The learning curve to configure a cluster is pretty high, even if you are and it takes days, let alone getting all the infrastructure, all of the various servers, bare metals, what have you, VMs, get it all configured. And it takes days. I've seen it takes months because the learning curve is that high. You can spin up a Kubernetes clusters in AWS in minutes, 10 to 15 minutes generally, versus, as I said, the weeks and the months that would normally take for you to do that on premise. So those are the 8 key business drivers that we hear often for migration.
Yeah, and so that brings us to our first poll of the day, and this is a multi-select, but we would love to get your feedback and find out which of these business drivers resonates with you the most. And so we certainly see all of these business drivers at play with all the migrations that we do here at ClearScale. But usually it's not just one, right? It's the cost savings, and it's being part of a merger and acquisition, or it's that data center consolidation and other pieces of technology. So we'd love for you to take a moment and answer this poll, and we will analyze those answers here shortly. Excellent. Got some good responses coming in. And certainly it's not surprising to see cost reduction as the number one here on the results. That's part of the reason why cost reduction was number one, certainly in our 8 common business drivers. But whether it's digital transformation, rapid growth, new technology, business agility, all of these are very popular in your responses as well. So appreciate the feedback, and let's take a look at what comes up next. So you've heard the business drivers, and now we'd like to explore the migration process. So Ed, if you would just walk us through kind of the common stages that we see here.
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, it's a successful migration requires 3 different phases, not just, let's just go and migrate all of your workloads. The first one is assess, which is to really think about, are you ready? And what do we need to get you to be ready? Mobilize, we start planning your migration, and then migrate and modernize. It just sounds exactly that. We migrating your workloads that we have figured out that we can do and how to do it in the previous phases. So let's dig into each of them. In the assess phase, as I said, is your organization ready? Right? Do you have specific business case for needing to migrate to the cloud? And primarily, this is what are the financial implications once you migrate to the cloud? And in the assess phase, we also try to pull together high-level TCO so that you can see, how what is your potential savings? Do you really want to do this? We generally never see a case where you don't want to do this because the TCO said you actually spend more money. We never see this, but at least depending on where you're in your organization, you can take that business plan or business case to the decision makers and say, hey, if we do this, this is what it's going to look like in the future. Do you have a project team identified for the migration? And really, what is the level of comfort with AWS technology? So, for example, if you are a VM organization, you are using a lot of ESX servers, you have a lot of engineers that knows VMware really well. But if the plan is, let's say, to modernize and say, I don't want to use VM anymore, although there is a way to move your VMware workloads to AWS, you might have to retrain your staff. And so we want to identify what that looks like. Does your project lead have a strong understanding of cloud migration process? And is this project lead singularly focused on the migration? So we have seen migrations where the project lead is not really focused, is being pulled in a lot of directions, so that it takes a lot of churn, a lot of cycles to get to answers. So we want to make sure we identify leads that understands the importance, as well as being able to focus on the migration process. Do you have a system to track inventory, manage your portfolio of your application and infrastructure? Do we know what they are and what they look like? And do you have updated documentations? Because it's hard to move what you don't know it's there. And are you aligned with best practices for security, AWS best practices for security and operations? Coming from an on-premise model, operating model, chances are it will not work with the cloud out of the box. Even your DR strategy, for example, it might not work out of the box. So we want to figure out where the gaps are and then zero into those gaps as we go through the next phase. And then the second phase is Mobilize, where we build a plan and refine your organization as well as the business case for your organization. So we want to understand your current operating model and the impact on your team after migration. As I said earlier, your infrastructure folks, your VMware team, for example, may become obsolete, right? Because you're not using VMware anymore. What are they going to do? So we want to take the opportunity to build a training plan and identify how can we utilize your staff as they are and train them and prepare them for the new world, and perhaps introduce new roles into your organization because you do have gaps that cannot be filled with existing staff. Understand your applications in your portfolio and the interdependencies between those applications, and be able to identify the sequence in which those applications can be migrated. So there may be, more than likely, you'll live in hybrid mode for a while where, let's say you have some shared microservices if your applications are already modern, where you might have to move those first before you move others. So we want to identify what's in your portfolio and sequence them so that we are successful in the migration. Determine any security and compliance requirements that maps to AWS best practices. That's obviously important. And explore the need for a landing zone and automation to drive best practices. Landing zone, it's anytime you talk to AWS, as a new organization coming to the cloud, they want you to think about landing zone. What landing zone is really a way to organize your accounts, as well as a way to apply automated governance to your accounts, so that, for example, if you don't want your developers in a development environment to ever spin up anything larger than, let's say, M5 large EC2s, you can apply that so they can't do that. They can only do, create instances up to a certain size you said they're allowed to, so that you don't have, we talk about cost reduction. So you don't, essentially your monthly bill runs away because your developers can do whatever they feel like they want to do and leave all of those instances up and running for all times. And then finally, formulate a game plan for the migration at scale, which is the next phase, right? The migration and modernize phase. And once we get here, we have already done some practice runs in the Mobilize phase. We also run through what we call pattern migrations, where we've identified some applications within your portfolio that fits a certain pattern. So meaning that if we have migrated all of the patterns, or maybe a couple of patterns within your portfolio, we know when we get to this phase, migrate and modernize phase, we can just go at scale because we've done it. We know how to do it. We don't have to think about it anymore. We can just cycle as quickly as possible. And some of the services that you may hear about or we may use for this phase includes those that's listed here: Migration Hub, Data Sync, Snow Family I talked about earlier, which is a device or a set of devices, different sizing that you may receive from AWS to transfer large amount of data. If you have great amount of data, they might even send you semi so that you can, I think that's at the hundreds of terabyte scale, so that they can truck your data back to the data center. Service catalog, I talked about earlier, where maybe you only want your developers to be able to create services or resources that looks and feels the same way. You enable service catalog in your landing zone so that they can self-serve for the most part and create a sandbox, EC2's database, whatever your technology stack is, but still within the control of your governance on your policy, so your cost doesn't run away because developers. I came from a development background where we have a tendency to do weird things. And then data migration service, which is moving your database from perhaps same engine to the from same engine from your on-premise to AWS, or from one engine to a different engine in AWS. For example, we have customers who want to get up Oracle, and in some instances, DMS can just transfer from Oracle to like Postgres, for example, depending on the complexity of your database. Those will all be discovered in the previous two phases. So I've talked about the MAP program earlier, and again, it stands for Migration Acceleration Program, and it's a prescriptive program that AWS has put together because they've done this, hundreds, thousands of tens of thousands of times, where they know what needs to happen, what needs to be done, and how it needs to happen for both the customer as well as ClearScale to be successful together for this migration. So the program comes in three parts. The first part is called the Migration Readiness Assessment, which is short for the acronym is MRA, where we go through almost, I don't want to say survey, but really a conversations where we answer a bunch of questions to derive at what you're really good at as an organization and what you need help in terms of in terms of things that we need to improve before we get into the next phase. And then next part, where we had previously called Mobilize, they have a program called Migration Readiness and Planning, or MRP. This is where we start getting into sprints, and every sprint we produce some results. Would it be a training plan? Would it be a landing zone? Would it be what your security roles and policies needs to look like? So that at the very end of the MRP program, we know what you need to do, how you need to support your applications after migration. And actually, we might even migrate, as I mentioned, some of the patterns of your application, so that when we get to phase 3, which is migration and modernization, we can go at speed. And we actually have a webinar coming up early September that would deep dive into what the migration look like. So kind of watch out for you in your email for the actual date. Right now, I believe it's early maybe second week of September, but Jay will firm that up once he has that date and send out an email notice. So let's jump a little bit deeper into each of the MAP phases, if you will. So the Migration Readiness, or MRA, and if you go through this journey, you will hear those acronyms a lot, MRA, MRP. two primary acronyms that you hear often. So the MRA phase determines the current state of your readiness and Migrate and identifies areas where you're really strong, where you need further development to migrate at scale. The MRA is based on the AWS Cloud Adoption Framework, or CAF, and it evaluates your readiness in 8 different dimensions: landing zone, operating model, security, compliance, migration process experience, skills and center of excellence, and migration plan and business plan. At the end of this, you will get a report with, they call it heat map, as well as a radar of where you're strong, as I said, and where you need help. So for example, I worked with a customer recently that did an MRA. They were really strong with the operating model, but they were really, they needed help with the skills and center of excellence. So we planned out a lot of training for the staff so that we can start talking the same vocabulary. When I say EC2, you know what I'm talking about. When I talk IAM, you know exactly what I'm referring to. Then MRP, or Migration Readiness Planning. This is where we prepare your cloud foundational, your cloud operational foundation. And as I said, we go into sprints in an agile approach where we have different work streams. There's 5 of them: Cloud Center of Excellence, Landing Zone, Operating Model, and Security and Compliance, where the main objectives of those work streams is to prepare your organization to operate in the cloud. The migration part is actually the easy part. The act of moving your workloads is actually the easy part, but how do you operate in the cloud after you migrate is the hard part. And then the other objectives are: develop strong migration plan. Obviously, we want to know how to migrate you at scale after this. Build compelling business case. So early on in assess, we give you a high level business case with TOC and how much it costs now versus how much it's going to cost you later. Now we really hone in because we know what exactly we will be moving in the next phase. We will look at 5 years projection of, okay, if you don't do anything, this is how much it's going to cost you. And somewhere in there, you're also more than likely it's going to upgrade your hardware at least once in 5 years. In 5 years, this is what's going to look like once we move to the cloud. So again, you can go back to your leadership and say, this is what it's going to do for us if we go through with this, so that we can get that buy-in and migrate you at scale. So it looks like we have another poll question. So where are you in your migration process?
Yeah, so we've got a handful of options here, whether you haven't started, you're looking for help, you're in the assessment phase, mobilization, like we talked about, you're in the process of migrating, or you just need to optimize because you've completed and need to finish. So we'd love to get an idea of where everybody is, and we'll speak to that here in just a few minutes. All right, as always, you kind of have a slew of options, and we're getting a variety of answers from people that haven't started to in the process of migration right now. So no one person on this webinar is or person type is dominating this webinar, but it's great to know that we can help in really all different phases, whether you haven't started or you just need optimization after the fact. So as we move on, we've heard about the business drivers, we've explored the migration process, but where's the real world application? So Ed, if you would start by telling us a little bit about Ebates and some of the other customers that we've helped.
All right. So we have a couple of case studies here. The first one is Ebates, which is now called Rakuten. I personally use it, and if you're not, you really absolutely should be, because you're leaving money on the table if you ever shop online. So when you click through their website, you receive a commission. They receive commission from the online stores. that you purchase through them. Actually, is a click through, so it's not like they're selling you anything directly. And in turn, they share a portion of that commission with you, and the commission varies depending on which store and when and all that good stuff. But yeah, if you're not using it, you absolutely should be, because you're leaving money on the table. So what are the challenges? eBay was, outgrowing its on-premise IT infrastructure and didn't have any elasticity needed to enable smooth customer experience. So the solutions we came up was that we developed an entirely new infrastructure in the cloud for them that included DevOps automation and Kubernetes. We talked about that briefly, for the container orchestration, so they can grow and scale infinitely as quickly as they need to. So as a result, Ebates now can implement fully automated version control configuration deployments and manage those deployments through every phase of the development cycle. So there's no worries that some manual deployments as well as manual configurations of the environments. Because we, as human, we make mistakes, and if we have to do things manually, chances are we will make those mistakes. So now they're fully automated and can scale infinitely to support their customers. Next one is Carematix. They are a healthcare management platform that's dedicated to supporting the patient's journey by providing various innovative technologies such as a hub service and a data platform for pharmaceutical, biotechnology, and medical device innovators. So they needed to migrate with very strict HIPAA requirements to AWS. They just didn't have the time nor the bandwidth to do that on their own. So again, we had helped them with automated tools to build the environment, infrastructure, and again set up deployment pipelines to help them migrate their applications and environments to the cloud. And now, as of now, Carematix has full control over its machines and the configurations through a highly available, secure, and compliant environment. The last case study is Boingo. For those of you, if you travel often, you probably have come across this company. They provide high-speed Wi-Fi and cell services to airports, stadiums, military bases, multifamily communities, and other public places worldwide. They needed to grow their infrastructure, expand their infrastructure capabilities to meet the growing global demand. And AWS having different regions and all availability zones within those regions can support their growth. So ClearScale, we migrated their entire platform from Rackspace to AWS and implemented automation again and modernized the RT infrastructure to support that growth. And as a result, Boingo now has the flexibility and capability to scale with global demand, and thanks to automations and AWS Power Cloud infrastructure. So the last slide I have is talking about give you an idea how long it takes for the various phases that I've spoken about earlier. So migration readiness assessment, it takes generally about a day. I've seen it done in 2 hours, but 2 to 4 is usually more realistic, sometimes longer, depending on how big your organization is and how many people would be involved with that assessment. The more people are involved, the longer it takes, simply because we say a lot more people wants to put in their opinions and their thoughts as well. So at the end, as I said, you get a report. It identifies challenges, establish capability gaps, determine migration readiness. What are the things, as I said, we need to tackle before we get into planning, and determine next steps. Then the MRP, in this case, it's a migration planning. It's 4+ weeks, generally longer than that. Again, the bigger your infrastructure, the bigger your portfolio is, as well as your organization, the longer it takes, because we do have to, there's a lot of touch points. We might have to talk to your security team. We have to figure out how your infrastructure is currently deployed, your CI/CD. What about your AWS environment? If you already built out an AWS environment, will it meet your needs? So it's at least 4 weeks, generally more. sometimes as much as 8 weeks or 16 weeks I've seen. And so in the MRP, or the migration planning, we established that business case you can take to your decision makers so that we can get the nod to do the actual migration in the following phase. Give you the TCO as well as ROI forecast. Pilot some migrations of your applications. I talked about that earlier, the patterns. If we can categorize your applications into different deployment patterns, once we know how to do one of them, we know how to do the rest of them. And then establish readiness and scale. And then the last thing is migration execution, 6+ weeks. Again, that varies depending on how big your portfolio is, how big your infrastructure is. We're doing migration at scale. There may be an opportunity where we're optimizing your applications and absolutely optimizing your processes as well. If you are, for example, currently deploying EC2s or even your VMs by hand every time an admin is going and clicking buttons, we would definitely introduce things like infrastructure as code as well as CI/CD, so that they start to look the same. And we have run customers who's deploying environments by hand. It takes them weeks every single time. By introducing infrastructure as code, we brought it down to minutes every time they need to deploy an environment. That's huge. So with that was my last slide. Are there any questions out there that we can answer?
Absolutely. So certainly, again, if you have any questions that are now coming to mind, please add them to the Q&A section, and I'll make sure Ed answers them before we wrap up today. But the first question I have on my list is, how can I know that my company is prepared to migrate?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we have a two-pronged approach for that. One is we put together a quick quiz, 10 questions-ish, to help customers do a self-assessment on where they are in their readiness. But on top of that, I would highly encourage everyone to reach out to us for a free consultation. We'll be more than happy to help you gauge your readiness through dialogues, where you are, what your goals are, and and help you dig a little bit deeper into your readiness.
Yeah, and knowing that there were a few people here that haven't migrated or were very in the early stages, I'll be sure to include that quiz as well as the recording of this webinar. So if anybody wants to take that quiz and see what kind of grade they get, it's going to spit back a 70%, 80% ready, and our solutions architects will then know what to really consult you on to kind of fill that gap. So it should be very helpful and expedite the process for you. The next question I have is, if I know I want to migrate, why do I need to go through the assessment and mobilize phases?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, we get this all the time. The goal of migration is migration, right? Let's just migrate. But as I said earlier, the honest answer is the act of migrating is actually fairly straightforward, right? If you have an application sitting on a Tomcat server or IS server, whatever, we can launch that with ease. If you have a Postgres database, MySQL database, we'll put in RDS. Those are simple things, but the challenge comes: what happens once it's in the cloud? How do you support it? How do you secure it? So the goal of Assess and Mobilize is to help you figure out, how do you support your infrastructure? How do you grow your team? How do you prepare your team? And how do you sequence those migrations? Because the idea of let's just pick up everything and move it, it's not, I think we all know that's really not a reality. So yeah, I know that the goal of migration is migration, but we have to do that planning up front for you to be successful. Otherwise, for lack of better words, it's going to be a mess.
Yeah, definitely. I live by the prior preparation prevents poor performance kind of method with migration. So as much as you can do ahead of time, it'll help you in the long run for sure. The next question I have is what are some of the common pitfalls in migration that I can try to avoid?
Oh yeah, the number one that we see, at least I see, is outdated documentation and inventory. we can do almost everything when it comes to migration, including train and coach a team to become cloud enabled. But if you don't know what you have and how it works, we can certainly spend time doing discovery and documentation, but that's likely not good use of our time and your budget, right? And if you're going to plan to move to a new house, for example, you generally would already know what and how much of it you want to move before your first conversation with a moving company, right? Because they can't give you a price if they don't know how many boxes they're moving. So it's kind of similar here where, we have a customer right now that their documentation is from 2011, and we know it's not the truth. And we're having a hard time figuring out what is the truth. So, like I said, outdated documentation is probably one of the biggest. I would strongly suggest really taking a look at what is your truth. What do you know about your workloads, both in terms of infrastructure, as well as the application and the dependencies of those applications, because we do have to sequence your application so that when you don't pick one up and then everything else fails the moment you do that.
And then when would I start seeing the ROI of migrating to the cloud? I'm sure that's a little bit of a complex question for you.
Yeah, that's I don't have a good answer for it. It really will vary based on the scale and the velocity of the migration. Initially, there's actually there's going to be a migration bubble, and that's a AWS term, I believe, where you will at the beginning actually be paying more. Because you are paying for cost of execution, training your staff, having resources both on premise as well as in AWS. So you're paying for two places. But at some point you will need be able to sunset your on-premise infrastructure, maybe start selling off some of the inventory, and you can begin to see your ROI. And this is while it's not a good answer, this is one of the work stream we go through as part of the Mobilize or the MRP that I talked about, where we figured out what this bubble looks like, as well as at what point in this journey where you start seeing that ROI and what that will look like.
And then Ed, how fast can I migrate? How many days should I be expecting?
Oh, that's a tough question. I guess the answer is it depends. It depends where you are in your journey. Like if you have no AWS account right now, actually also varies depending on how big your organization is. So let's say if you are, it's the name of a company, Cisco, it's going to take years, right? Because they're huge. I'm sure they already, and most of the infrastructure is already in cloud. But if you're a mom and pop, for example, it could be faster because we might not need to go through MRP extensively. For example, in MRP, we do design a cloud center of excellence. But if there's 4 people in your company, you are the cloud center of excellence. So we can start skipping steps. So unfortunately, I can't give a straight answer on that without knowing more.
Got it. And then finally, what I have here is: do you offer managed services after migration?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we actually have a managed services team that provides 24/7 monitoring, as well as DevOps supports and DevOps supports, which is anything from patching to we can perform CI/CD if necessary. But yeah, we do have a managed services product team, if you will. One interesting thing about ClearScale is we don't force that on you. We don't, some of our competitors, and not to pat ourselves on the back, but some of our competitors do force you into a managed service package, whereas we don't. We want that to be, we want our engagement with you to be as flexible and as much as you want us to be engaged. So, but yeah, all that said, yes, we do offer a managed service product after the fact.
Excellent. And unless anyone else wants to jump in with a question, we'll start to wrap this up. And as promised, we are giving away a $100 gift card. I've thrown all the names into a randomizer online, and our lucky recipient today will be Barry Spring. So Barry, I'll be reaching out and getting some contact information from you so I can send you over a digital gift card, and hope you spend it wisely. So, well, we are up against the clock, but should you have any other questions, please feel free to schedule a consultation with our solutions architects by simply reaching out to sales@clearscale.com. We do have a few other webinars rapidly approaching, including processing streaming events at scale with Amazon Kinesis and AWS Glue, scheduled for August 25th. And then, as Ed previously mentioned, we do have a couple of great migration webinars that are not necessarily follow-ups to this one, but really go hand in hand. So application migrations, a technical deep dive with AWS, is tentatively scheduled for September 10th. We should be sending out invitations very soon. And then migrations, clients share top 10 lessons learned, is tentatively scheduled for September 24th. And that's definitely one to look out for. It's going to be a 2+ hour event. We're diving into real world applications, talking to AWS, Cloud Chomp, and hosting a couple of our actual customers, giving their kind of testimonials on their entire process, solutions, and what was solved. So again, please make sure that you get these on your calendars early, and we look forward to having you as part of these migration webinars coming up. And certainly, if you have any other questions, please reach out. But thank you again for attending.